On the 28th of April 1943, a sitting president of the United States walked into a building in Kentucky that almost no one is allowed to enter. Franklin Roosevelt was 3,000 miles from the war he was managing. He had come to look at metal. For the next 31 years, the United States Mint would describe that afternoon in a very specific way. Not as the first time a president visited, as the one and only time a gold vault at Fort Knox was opened for anyone other than authorized personnel. Since the building opened in 1937, the number of outsiders who have stood inside it is small enough to count. This is the record of who they were and what the paperwork actually says about what is in there. The land was transferred in 1935. Construction finished in December 1936. The government needed somewhere to put an enormous quantity of gold, and it needed somewhere that was not on a coast. Fort Knox, Kentucky, sat 30 miles southwest of Louisville in the middle of the country, next to an army garrison. Then came the problem of moving the gold. The first shipment went in January 1937 by railroad, but it did not travel as freight, it traveled as mail. The bars were shipped through the United States Postal Service, and the reason is stranger than it sounds. At the time, the post office was the only agency in the federal government that could accept liability if the shipment was lost. Sending the nation's gold reserve by mail was not a quirk. It was the only way to ensure it. The shipments continued for 6 months. By June 1937, the depository was fully operational. The bars themselves are unremarkable to look at. 7 inches long, 3 5/8 inches wide, 1 3/4 inches thick, roughly the size of an ordinary brick, and about 400 troy ounces, a little over 27 pounds each. Stack enough of them in one building, and you have the largest concentration of gold the United States has ever assembled in a single place. By the end of 1941, that figure reached its all-time peak, 649.6 million ounces. Remember that number. The building cost $560,000. Into it went 16,000 cubic feet of granite, 4,200 cubic yards of concrete, 750 tons of reinforced steel, and 670 tons of structural steel. You will find a great many claims online about the door. How much it weighs, how it works, how long it takes to open. Almost none of those numbers appear in any official publication. The Mint does not publish them, so we are not going to repeat them. What the Mint does say is more interesting than a number anyway. The actual structure and contents of the facility are known to only a few people, and no single person knows all the procedures required to open the vault. That is not a security feature bolted on afterwards. That is the design. The protection is distributed across people deliberately so that no individual, however senior, however trusted, is capable of opening it alone. The depository is run by an officer in charge. It is guarded by the United States Mint Police, a force most people do not know exists. Its officers are selected at Mint headquarters in Washington, trained at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, and cleared through a full background investigation. And the Mint is candid about which of its defenses it rates most highly. Not the granite, not the steel, the secrecy. The less the public knows about the building, the harder the building is to attack. For most of its life, the depository has held gold, but not only gold. In 1939, the Lincoln Cathedral copy of Magna Carta, written in 1215, traveled to New York as the centerpiece of the British Pavilion at the World's Fair. It was the first time the document had left Britain. The fair closed in October, and the British government looked at the Atlantic, looked at the German submarines in it, and decided the document was safer staying where it was. On the 28th of November 1939, the British ambassador formally deposited Magna Carta at the Library of Congress. 2 years later, the United States entered the war, and the calculation changed again. In December 1941, the Library of Congress evacuated its treasures to Fort Knox. Magna Carta went. So did the Constitution. So did the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration arrived in Louisville at 10:30 in the morning on the 27th of December 1941. It was placed in compartment 24, outer tier, ground level. The founding document of the United States spent the war in a numbered box on the floor of a gold vault in Kentucky. The Declaration went home in 1944. Magna Carta returned to England in 1946. And then there is the strangest resident of all, the Holy Crown of St. Stephen, the coronation crown of Hungary, along with the sword, scepter, orb, and cape, ended the Second World War in American hands. It was held at Fort Knox. It stayed there for a quarter of a century, while the State Department maintained a consistent position. The crown belonged to the Hungarian people, and its return could only be considered in light of a substantial improvement in relations with Hungary. That improvement was judged to have arrived in 1978. On the 6th of January, Secretary of State Cyrus Vance handed the crown back in Budapest. Now the gold itself. At the end of 1941, Fort Knox held 649.6 million ounces. By September 1974, the Mint published a figure of 147.4 million ounces, held in 13 vault compartments, valued at $6.2 billion. 500 million ounces had left over roughly 3 decades, sold, transferred, and moved through the machinery of a monetary system that no longer works the way it did in 1941. Today, the Mint reports the holding as 147,341,858.382 fine troy ounces. Compare those last two numbers. 1974, 147.4 million. Now, 147.3 million. For 52 years, that figure has barely moved. According to the Mint, the only gold removed has been very small quantities taken to test purity during scheduled audits. There is one more number worth understanding because it causes more confusion than any other. On the government's books, that gold is valued at $42.22 an ounce. That is not a market price and has never pretended to be. It is a statutory figure, fixed by law since 1973. The market price in 2025 was above $4,000. So the book value is not a claim about what the gold is worth. It is an accounting convention that Congress has simply never changed. Which brings us to the question people actually ask. Has anyone checked that it is there? The answer is in the audit record. And the audit record is more detailed than its reputation suggests. In September 1974, the policy of absolutely no visitors was set aside. Treasury Secretary William Simon invited members of Congress to inspect the gold. The Mint's director, Mary Brooks, invited the press to watch them do it. And for the first time, photography was permitted inside. The delegation went in on the 23rd of September 1974. The following day, a formal audit began. Auditors from the General Accounting Office and the Treasury opened 3 of the 13 compartments at Fort Knox, observed the physical inventory, and assayed samples of the metal. The GAO reported no differences between the gold in those compartments and the depository's records. The following year, on the GAO's recommendation, the Treasury established a standing body with an unglamorous name, the Committee for Continuing Audits of United States Government-Owned Gold. It worked through the reserves compartment by compartment over years. By the 30th of September 1986, about 92% of all United States government-owned gold had been inventoried by either the GAO or that committee. Each compartment, once audited, was closed with an official joint seal, and those seals have been inspected annually since to confirm they have not been broken. By the end of the 2008 fiscal year, every one of the 42 compartments across the 3 storage sites had been inventoried at least once. Then, on the 24th of August, 2017, the doors opened again. The Treasury Secretary, the Governor of Kentucky, and a group of members of Congress went inside, the first non-authorized visitors since 1974, 43 years between the 2 visits. So what does the public record actually establish? It establishes that the gold has been counted, compartment by compartment, by more than one federal body over more than 3 decades. It establishes that the seals on those compartments are checked every year. It establishes that the reported quantity has been effectively unchanged since the Nixon administration. And it establishes something else which is easy to miss. Nearly everything the public knows about this building comes from the government that owns it. The materials, the tonnage, the procedures, the audit results. There is no independent vantage point because the entire point of the design is that there is no independent vantage point. That is not evidence of a problem. It is the necessary consequence of a facility whose most effective defense is that almost nobody knows anything about it, which is why the small human details survive better than the numbers do. A president standing in a vault in 1943 in the middle of a world war, the Declaration of Independence, spending 3 years in compartment 24, the Hungarian crown jewels waiting 25 years in Kentucky for a diplomatic thaw, a shipment of national gold reserves traveling by rail, in the mail, because the post office was the only body willing to insure it. The building was designed so that no one person could ever open it alone. 9 decades on, that is still the most reliable thing anyone